Welcome back to a brand new episode of Mastering Programming. In today's episode, we'll simply be creating a function with parameters, and a function with return types. We'll also be learning how to call them and how to modify them so that they suit our situations. To start us off, I already created a function and I'm going to call this function our first function. Now you can go ahead and actually call this anything you want, but I usually call my functions things that make sense. For example, this is our first function and that's why I called it our first function. Now the keyword func he stands for function, and it just allows Swift to understand that whatever's going to be written after the word is actually going to be the name of our function. Let's go ahead and print something, and I'm going to say this is our first function. Let's go ahead and run this, and I want you to notice something. Notice how nothing actually happened. Although we didn't get any errors, and let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see this better. Although we don't have any errors or any warnings, nothing happened. This was not printed. Now the reason why this was not printed is that because we actually defined the function correctly, but we never called it. All you need to do to call the function is simply type the name. And now if I run this, we're gonna get we're gonna execute the code written inside our function right here. This is our first function. Next, I'm going to show you how to define a function with some parameters. Now, parameters are words or keywords that are written inside the bracket which define or allow the function to use them. Let me give you an example. I'll type in num1 and I'm going to say int, and I'm going to say num2, and I'm also going to give that an int. Right now, I define two parameters, one called num1 and one called num2. And I told Swift that both those parameters are going to be accepting type integers, such as numbers like 3, 4, and 5. Let me show you how we can use them. So we can go ahead and say sum. We're going to declare an object called sum, and we're going to say num1 plus num2. Now all I'm doing here is I'm saying that the object sum is going to be of value num1 plus num2. And now let's go ahead and print sum. Now notice, although those numbers, those objects are not actually carrying anything, they are still being able to be used here. And that's because these are parameters. You don't have to actually give them a particular value at the beginning when you're declaring them. But let me show you something. Let's go ahead and first of all, let me just write this as let, and let's run this. Notice how nothing also happens. Now you might think that calling the function like this, just like we did last time, will help. But unfortunately that will not help, and it will simply say missing argument for parameter num1. What Swift is trying to tell you is that you need to pass in something here which matches the parameters you have passed here. So all I'm going to do is simply type in num, and Swift already auto-completes it for you. Now here Swift is asking pass an integer, so I'm going to pass in 2. And here it's also asking for an integer, so this time I'm going to pass in 1. Let's run this and see what will happen. So as you can see, this function actually worked based on the numbers that we have inserted, or the arguments that we have inserted when we were calling the function. And right now you can see the value as 3, which is correct. Now this is very useful and can be used in many different ways. For example, we can pass in different numbers, or we can even add in names and so on. Depending on what parameters we passed here, we have to pass equivalent arguments. Next, let me show you how you can create a function which provides a return type. Let's go ahead and remove this. And instead of saying print sum, I want you to try something. Let's go ahead and say return. And let's say return, oh, sorry for that. Let's say return sum. If we try and run this, we're actually going to get an error, and it's going to say unexpected non-void return value in void function. What Swift is trying to tell you is that this function was defined, and it was defined as a as a void function, meaning this function will not be returning anything. Now, let's say we wanted to return something. All we're gonna do is simply say, you type in this, and then if we're returning a string, we're gonna say returning a string. That way I can come here. First, let's give it a parameter, and we're gonna say name, and we're gonna say string. Next, let's come here and say return name. And as you can see, this error is now gone because we are returning what we thought Swift will be returning at the beginning. In fact, we can actually use this and access it anytime we want. Let me show you what I mean. So I'll go ahead and remove this because I only created it so we can avoid having an error. And I'm going to say var name, and I'm gonna give that name a value of David, which is my name, David Bolus. Now we're returning that name, so we are actually able to access this object straight away. Also, let me change this to let so we don't annoy Swift. Let's run this just so we can see if there's any errors, and we don't have any errors. Let's say we want to access this particular object. All we're going to do is gonna come here and we're going to say with return, and if we print this, nothing is actually going to happen. But sorry, if we run this, nothing is going to happen. But let's say we print it, we're going to be able to actually access this information, this object, and you're going to see that in a second as David Bullis. Now imagine all the things you can do with this. You can actually assign an object from a function to a separate public object. For example, I can come here and say var public name, and we can say that it's equivalent or equal to with return. Let's run this and see what will, and actually let's come here and print public name so you can see what it actually looks like, and let's run this. And you realize that public name now acquired the same value that we stored inside a private function. So this was actually it for this episode. Now you can know how to create or define functions, how to call them, how to use parameters and call them using arguments, and how to define or create functions which provide a return type. Thank you for watching, and as always, remember to subscribe and have a good day.